There's a lot of young players in the league that have huge early expectations from how they were hyped up and where they were selected in the NBA draft. But not every player lives up to the hype and those expectations right away, which can lead to a majority of people giving up on them too soon, like with what happened to D'Angelo Russell. But as he proved, it may be too early to give up on some of these guys, because they're still young and can break out in a year. So here's 8 players that it's too early to give up on. Number 1, Jalen Brown. Jalen Brown came out of high school and college with huge expectations, with the Boston Celtics selecting him 3rd overall in 2016. And it's safe to say that while he's shown potential, he hasn't played like a 3rd overall pick up until this point, and he knows that. And I feel like a lot of people forget about how good Jalen can actually be. But of course, as most of us know, the Celtics' stacked roster play a big part in what's holding him back. And out of everyone on the team aside from Gordon Hayward, it's affected Jalen the most. Brown even said, "This season I had to take on a lighter role and I didn't play as good as I should have because we've been experimenting with lineups. But I didn't really look at it as a negative thing. I looked at it as saying, okay, I'm gonna play better so nobody can say anything." So he knows this role affects his game, and it's good to see that he's got the right mindset about it. I mean, in his first year in the league, he did have a slow start, but last year with Gordon Hayward out, he had a solid year putting up 14 and 5 on 40% from 3, and then did work in the playoffs putting up 18 a game. And then this past year, his numbers only slightly dropped after coming off the bench nearly the entire year. But again, he's coming up big in the playoffs. Jalen Brown's only 22 years old right now, and he's becoming a solid 3-point shooter, getting playoff experience, and is a great two-way player that I'm sure once he gets a bigger role on either the Celtics or another team, he's really gonna live up to being the 3rd overall pick one day soon. Number 2, Markelle Fultz. We all know that Markelle Fultz has had a terrible start to his NBA career, and after being the number 1 overall pick and forgetting how to shoot, many people have already considered him a bust. Which, if he keeps playing the way he has, or not playing at all like he's done for most of the time he's officially been in the NBA, he will be. But that can change. And that's because for his entire first year and a half of his NBA career, he forgot how to shoot and nobody knew why. But in December of last year, the real reason came out. And that's because he was diagnosed with TOS, which basically disrupts how a person moves their arm and is mostly common in baseball pitchers. And this affected Markelle because his shoulder hurt whenever he would shoot, so he had to experiment and try to find different forms, which really explains those free throws. So he actually didn't forget how to shoot, he just wasn't able to shoot how he used to, and because a basketball player had never been diagnosed with TOS, nobody knew why. And while I know next to nothing about baseball, I did some digging. There's 2 ways to get TOS repaired, by either constantly rehabbing or getting a surgery that removes your top rib to allow for better shoulder movement. And there haven't been too many pitchers seriously diagnosed with TOS, but out of all of them that have, all-stars like Chris Carpenter, Josh Beckett, and Matt Harrison were each forced to retire because of it. While Matt Harvey tried to get the surgery to get his rib taken out, and it worked and he came back, but he was never the same player. And neither were Jamie Garcia, Phil Hughes, and Tyson Ross, who all came back from the injury but were never the same. So this injury is really no joke, and it could be career-ending for Fultz. But there was one case that gives him hope and is the main reason on why it's too early to give up on him. All of those players that I just mentioned were in the later stages of their career when they got TOS. But then there was 23-year-old Mike something, who had his rib removed in 2015 because of TOS and returned to the next year to having the best year of his career, and have shown no signs of it slowing down his game and has only been better since returning. So since Markelle's only 20 years old and has been doing rehab for the past 2 years and nothing's worked, if he does end up getting this surgery, which is what it might come to, there's still really hope for his young NBA career. Number 3, Otto Porter. Ever since 2017 when Washington gave Otto a max 4-year, $100 million contract, he's been called a disappointment, overrated, overpaid, and the reason that the Wizards haven't been able to take their team to the next level. Due to the fact that he had all these high expectations, was getting paid nearly $30 million a year, and had only averaged 14 and 5 in the 2 years since the big contract, he didn't look like he was anything worth it, and definitely didn't look like he was getting any better. But even though all of that is true, it's still too early to give up on Otto. And that's because after getting traded to the Chicago Bulls earlier this year, Otto came out for them putting up 17, 5, and 2 on nearly 49% from 3, shooting over 5 of them a game. Now that was only through a 15-game stretch, and I don't ever see him shooting that good for a whole season, but he could easily shoot close to that because he shot 44% from 3 in 2017 and 18. So if he can shoot that well, be as good as he has been on defense, and step his game up even more for Chicago once he finds his role on that team, I could easily see him being a 20-point per game type of player and turning his career around. Now there's a chance he could still always go back to his old ways, but with his performance for the Bulls so far, it showed us to not give up on him just yet. Number 4, Jabari Parker. So here's the other half of the Otto Porter trade. When taking a brief look back at Jabari's short career, it looks like a lost cause. When you think about all the injuries he's had early on the Bucks, the fact that he was traded to the Bulls, then taken out of the rotation, traded again to the Wizards, and now could end up on another team next season, all while averaging a steady 15 points per game the past 5 years. But when you really look into things, it's a different story that shows that Jabari just hasn't found the right fit for himself on an NBA team yet. Because when he was drafted 2nd overall on the Bucks, Giannis was a rookie and nobody knew how good he'd become. And Jabari Parker was really drafted to be their star player. But when Giannis developed as quickly as he did, Jabari quickly lost that spot. And he could have still fit into that second option role, but then Chris Middleton developed just as much and was a better fit as a second option for the team. So it left Parker as the odd man out. But to show that he really could have fit into that second option role, in 2016 Middleton missed nearly the entire season with an injury, and that was Jabari's best season so far, where he put up 26 and 3. But eventually he was moved to Chicago, where he just clearly never fit in their system, which was why even though he was still putting up 15 a game, he just wasn't played. And then this season he was traded to the Wizards, most likely for the fact that they can choose not to pick up his player option and let him walk this offseason. Now I don't know what would be the best team or what's the best situation for Jabari, and he's drawn comparisons to Carmelo Anthony, which we've learned isn't the best thing, so there might be no perfect scenario for him. But at only 23 years old and with the unfair circumstances he's faced, it's way too early to give up on him. Number 5 and 6, Lonzo Ball and Brandon Ingram. I put these guys in one number because I feel like I talk about them on this subject way too much, so I'm not going to spend too much time here. But I will say that there's still hope for Lonzo and Ingram. Now I don't think that Lonzo will ever be a superstar like people made him out to be at first, because I mean most players that turn into stars already look a lot better by their second year in the league. But it's still way too early to flat out give up on him like people have been. I mean, one day he could definitely develop into a player on the same level as D'Angelo Russell is right now, because Lonzo's really only played 100 games in the league, and even though D'Angelo was better in his first 2 years than Lonzo's been, Russell showed that a player with potential that doesn't look like he's making any progress could still break out at any moment. And as for Ingram, I used to have no faith in him, but there's no reason not to. He's progressed every year, looks a lot more comfortable on the court, and he's really learning how to use his size to his advantage. For a 2nd overall pick, he really didn't come out of the gates looking strong, but every aspect of his game since then has improved every season, and there's no reason that that wouldn't continue, especially since he's only 21. And now that Magic Johnson's not there anymore, to publicly make comments about his potential that single him out and lead to big expectations from him way too soon, that should only help him. But first, let's just hope he fully recovers from his blood clot problem. Number 7, DeMarcus Cousins. Alright, DeMarcus Cousins isn't a young player like the rest of these guys that has never really proved himself before, but he's still a guy that because of his injuries, some people might already be ready to give up on him or the fact that he could be an all-star player again one day, so we had to include him. Now, as we know, DeMarcus tore his Achilles last year on what left a lot of questions on what the rest of his career would look like. Some people thought he was done as a player, and others still had hope. But no one knew exactly how he'd look when he came back. And after he did, he clearly didn't play with the same athleticism he used to, but he was only back for 30 games. And then he just recently tore his quad, which is putting him out of action for even longer. But even with this new injury, and even though he wasn't as athletic right away, the man still managed to put up 16 and 8 for the Warriors in 10 minutes less per game than he played in the 48 games he played for the Pelicans, where he put up these numbers. Almost an entire quarter with a much lighter role for the Warriors. Now to put these stats into perspective, if you adjust Cousins' minutes per game to what they were in 2017 and 18, that means he was on pace to average 22, 11, and 2 this year. And you gotta think that's all-star level. So if he gets his minutes back up next season, we could really see him playing at a much higher level than I think a lot of people expected him to. He has had to play a different style since his return, but if he can just continue to make that work, it's a real possibility. Number 8, Jahlil Okafor. Personally, I don't think I have faith in Jahlil for the future, but he's shown us this past season that it still might be too early to give up on him. Now, most fans and NBA executives did give up on him after his rookie season, where he put up an impressive 17-7 for Philly. But with Nerlens Noel and Joel Embiid already on the roster, he quickly lost all of his minutes when they got healthy. And that's because they realized that Okafor was a traditional post-up big man with a game that doesn't fit on very many teams in the NBA today. He's not the best defender and he can't shoot threes. So that puts him in a weird spot and is why he wasn't used when he was traded to the Nets and barely used when he was traded to the Pelicans. For a minute, he really almost found himself out of the league, but in New Orleans is where he showed that there's still hope. Where when this season, Anthony Davis was out or playing limited minutes with an injury for a 9-game stretch, where Jahlil came out and put up 18, 10, and 2 blocks a game on nearly 70% shooting. Now, he didn't keep up that pace after that because his minutes fluctuated for the rest of the season after AD returned. But with Anthony Davis getting traded this offseason, that leaves a huge hole for Jahlil to fill. And that's the reason I think he shouldn't be given up on. He could do nothing with this opportunity, but it feels like the perfect storm for him to build his name back up. It's his one chance to show the Pelicans that his style can fit on their team. Now, I'm sure not everyone on this list will turn their careers back around, but comment who you think's most likely to do that. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll catch you next video.